Hello again, folks. So I recently picked up a new scope for my Dreamline Lite Compact, a Vector Veyron 3-12x44 to replace the Aztec Emerald 5-25x50 that I currently had on there, just to get the entire rig more light and compact, which is really the whole purpose of this particular gun. It's going to be the Woods Walker type gun. So I wanted something, very light, nimble, maneuverable, and so having that Emerald on there, it was just too much. You can see the size difference here. It's about 5 inches shorter, and I think about 7 or 8 ounces lighter. So really a big difference. So while I got it mounted up and dialed in, and was super impressed with the scope overall, and how much lighter it made the rig, and the glass was great. But I quickly realized that because of how compact the scope was, that there wouldn't be enough room on the tube to mount my side shot scope cam. Really, there's barely enough room just for the scope mount ring. You can see here it wasn't even close. It needed another 1/4 inch at least. So that was a bummer, because the Veyron is really a great scope, and it was exactly what I was looking for. But I briefly considered just going back to the Emerald, but then thought, to heck with it. I'll just see if I can get the current rings I have machined down to a point where the side shot mount will fit. Just see if I can kind of machine them in half or something like that. And that ended up working quite well. So I figured I'd get some video of it and bring you all along for the ride, if you will. So this is the DM45R mill that I'll be using. It's not heavy duty by any means. It's an import, but it really gets the job done, and I like it. It also has power feed and digital readouts, and both of those really come in handy for jobs like this. Alright, so that's too much talking. Let's get to cutting some metal. So this is the basic setup here, just holding the scope ring upright in the vise, because there really wasn't a whole lot of other options for holding this thing securely on the machine. Using some parallels to raise it up, and a thin strip of aluminum to act as a bit of a soft jaw on one side. 5/8 4-flute end mill that was just long enough to cut the vertical length that was needed with each pass. And here I'm making the first cut. So I started off just taking light cuts. I was a little worried about that setup. So I'm maybe 20 thou depth of cut here, just to make sure there wasn't too much chatter or anything like that going on. There was a little bit of chatter, but it's something you just have to deal with. It doesn't matter how securely I was holding it with the vise, there was going to be some chatter. I made sure to have the screws, obviously, in the top of that scope mount, just to try to hold everything as securely as possible. And so just making passes back and forth. Once I did that first pass, I got a little more brave with it. I started taking 40, 50, 60 thou depths of cut. I think I wound up going to maybe 400 thou max total. Was about what I took off, but just making light passes because of how this setup was. And if I had to do a bunch of these, I could get even like a little Weaver style rail, a little 11mm rail, and machine something with that to hold rings like this. But obviously it's a one-off, so you really don't have any options like that. So just taking light passes back and forth, taking it easy, keeping an eye on it, not using any coolant here. A lot of times I use kerosene as a coolant for aluminum. That's what these rings are. It's what most rings are these days. And just because I had the camera right up in there, I didn't want coolant flinging around. It can be good to use compressed air like that too in situations like this, just to keep the chips off the material. The chips, aluminum chips especially, can kind of weld to the material as you're machining it. Especially if you're using uncoated tools, which this is. This end mill, it's a cobalt bearing end mill, but it's not coated. It's not a carbide end mill either. And so you can actually see on the left side of that scope ring a little bit of what we call chip welding, where the chips kind of stick to the side of that ring as it passes. And it's more prevalent in climb milling, at least on this machine for some reason. And so this is just kind of an outer view. It just shows the power feed going. And so I'm not actually having to hand crank it. On the very left side of the mill, you see that switch that engages the power feed. And so you see it just kind of turning and moving in that axis automatically. And it's very handy when you're doing especially long cuts or repeated cuts like this. Because you can just kind of step back. Obviously you want to keep an eye on this stuff, but you just step back and let it go. You get a much better finish that way, a much more consistent finish when using power feed like this. And then also having the DRO, you can just kind of see that up out of the right hand side. That's the DRO. I think I have another shot of that. It makes things easy. You just keep track of your position, the spindle position at all times, the table position. It just really makes things easier. And so you can see here I just started to get into where the threads were And so here you can see it's almost getting to full depth. We've now actually gotten past those threads. I guess I didn't get a whole lot of video inside there. It gets repetitive, obviously, but now we've gone through the threads of the first set of screws that were in there, and actually getting close to final depth. And so just taking lighter passes here, you see more of that chip welding that I was talking about before, which can really be a nuisance, and especially if you're not using any type of lubricant or coolant like kerosene, WD-40, things like that. And so this was probably the last light finishing pass. You should see on that left-hand side, it'll basically, yeah, so it basically cleaned up that screw hole because it's already passed through there on the right side. The left side, that last bit of screw hole will finally be cleaned up as she passes through there. And that was about it for the milling. I think it turned out pretty nice. I was a bit concerned with the way I had it held in the vise, somewhat precariously, but I kept an eye on it, and it seemed to work out well. The surface finish isn't spectacular, but certainly good enough for what I'm doing here. Used a smooth file and some 220 grit sandpaper to knock the burrs off the edges. And I also wanted to mention, I'm certainly aware that thinner profile rings exist, you know, ones with one screw on each side. I used those for many years. I'm sure that many of you did as well. But looking at those online, I got to thinking that even those might not be thin enough, and I needed high rings also, so to be able to fit the ridiculously large FX mags under the scope. So that would have further limited the available options. I would have hated to shell out more money for high quality rings, you know, waited a week or two to get them, only to find out that they too wouldn't fit. So really just a big waste of time and money in the end. So went this route instead and decided to just machine some rings that I already had on hand in order to ensure that it would turn out exactly like I needed it to for a good fit. You can also see here that I ended up cutting a little bevel into that one corner just to provide some clearance for the set screws that are on the side shot scope cam mount. I realized that the first time I went to test fit it, those screws were hitting a little bit, and so I just used a file, actually used a Dremel and then a file just to quickly knock that corner off and provide a little clearance for those set screws inside of there. And so this is her mounted up on there. It fit quite well. I'm happy with the way that it turned out, and I was able to get the side shot on there without issues, as you can see here. And so I think it was a nice little project and worth it. Definitely, you know, spend a couple hours doing that, and then also making this video, which I had a little more time, but I think it's all worth it. And I don't think the video would be quite complete if I didn't show at least a little bit of footage from the scope cam, just sort of showing the end result. And so I just put it on there quickly. I didn't have it all completely leveled. I didn't have all the screws in it, and so you might have noticed, but I got it securely mounted just to test it and see how it all would go. And you can see that it's quite a bit off, so I get it dialed in. I'm just taking some shots at the a plinker target that's 50 yards. 50 yards. It was also raining a little bit, and so I'm actually shooting out of my kitchen window right here and just roughly getting it dialed in. Those paddles are, I think they're 2.5 or 3 inch paddles on that plinker target, and so just taking a few shots to test it out and for your enjoyment here for sitting through this entire lengthy and wordy video. And so thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed coming along for this little project to get this done. I enjoy doing things like this. It's very satisfying to me when you can make or modify or build something yourself instead of buying stuff. You know, you get it done, and that way it's exactly the way you want it to be. And I encourage everyone else to try to do the same, you know, just to try to make and build your own things, machine and modify your own things. That way you get it just the way you want it. So thanks for coming along. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Leave any comments that you feel are pertinent. I appreciate any feedback, certainly. And thanks for watching.